You are listening to The Truth Tank. I am your host, The Tank. Welcome to The Truth Tank if this is your first time here, and welcome back if you're a repeat offender. Before we get into tonight's show, just a few things I would like to go over. If you want to support The Truth Tank, make sure you hit that subscribe button on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts from. Follow the Facebook page, join the community for all the latest updates on what is happening with The Truth Tank. Big thank you to everyone who's been downloading episodes. We've gone past 300 downloads. It's a bit slow growing, but it's getting there, so a big thank you. Big shout out to everyone in the US who has been supporting The Truth Tank. It means a lot, and I hope you enjoy it. Tonight's episode is going to be part one of a 3-part series about Bill Gates and the conspiracy theories that surround him. There's been a lot of speculation and a lot of rumour about Bill Gates in recent months with COVID-19 and his plans to vaccinate the planet, microchips, and whatever other conspiracy theories that have been floating around out there about him. I wanted to dig a little deeper and get to the bottom of the Bill Gates conspiracies. For whatever reason, I'm really fascinated by this one. I love a good conspiracy theory, as most of you who are listening probably do, but I also realise there's a lot of bullshit that surrounds conspiracy theories. It's also the biggest reason why they're not taken more seriously, and why so many people are so easy to pass conspiracy theories off as just ramblings of some nutcase. However, the Bill Gates one is pretty interesting. There's a lot of truth to it, but there's also a lot of bullshit. On part one of the great Bill Gates conspiracy, we're going to be having a look at the history of Bill Gates and Microsoft. We're not going to get into the conspiracies tonight. This episode is just going to be a backstory of Bill Gates, a bit of insight into his personality, how he built Microsoft, how he earned his money, and how he runs his businesses. We're also going to be having a look at the origins of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If we get time, we're going to be having a look at the book, The Road Ahead by Bill Gates. So hopefully the book might help us connect some of the dots back to not only Bill Gates and how he views the future, but hopefully it also connects some of the dots to the COVID-19 conspiracy. His pattern of predictions might help explain why people think he's behind it. The purpose of having a look at his history is to determine if there's any reoccurring patterns that pop up in his personal life and how he ran and manages Microsoft. To see if we can determine a pattern with his charitable work and some of his future plans, such as his vaccination programs, his investment in some of the new medical technology that will be popping up in the near future, his building factories to manufacture the COVID-19 cure when it comes out, and if there is any truth to him trying to have a monopoly over the vaccine industry. The more I research into Bill Gates, the more a lot of this conspiracy does look like bullshit and internet speculation. At the same time, there's a lot of truth to it. He is a very weird guy. He's pretty creepy. Having said that, not every billionaire who has a successful business has sold their soul to the devil to do so. 9 times out of 10, they've been successful through hard work, discipline, and just being really smart. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's show. This is episode 17, The Great Bill Gates Conspiracy, The Ballad of Billy G. So most people know that Bill Gates is the genius behind Microsoft, which in turn made him one of the wealthiest men on the planet. But there is a lot more to Bill than meets the eye. So over the course of the next 3 shows, we'll be looking at Bill Gates from his upbringing, the founding of Microsoft, the Gates Foundation, and the many conspiracies that surround this very unusual man. We will be looking at every aspect of his career to determine if there is any truth to the rumours that surround him. Now, in my opinion, Bill Gates does have a very creepy appearance. He's got a very weird pathological look to in his eyes. He kind of has the appearance of a serial killer in a mugshot. Is there a little evil to these eyes, or is that just the intensity that a brilliant man who has created one of the wealthiest companies in the world has? If you look at all these obsessive, really driven billionaires that create these businesses, they all have this steely-eyed determination in their eyes. They all have the look of, my plan is going to work, I'm going to be successful, nothing is going to stand in my way. The other thing about Bill Gates is he has a very plain, white, nerdy guy costume that really isn't fooling anyone anymore. He has the V-neck sweater with the button-up shirt underneath and the khaki pants. He has this very approachable, very unintimidating look to him. He looks like a school teacher, very nerdy, very intellectual kind of guy. Is this just a costume? Is he really trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes? For me personally, the jury is still out on Gates. Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit around the guy, but there's also a lot of truth to some of these conspiracy theories. Is he being 100% honest? What does history tell us? That no billionaire in history is completely honest. And there's many different reasons for that. Some is, the protection of ideas and trade secrets, but there could also be some nefarious reasons for not being 100% honest. But then again, no one's really 100% honest. One of the big reasons I don't trust Bill Gates is I can never trust a man that sits with his legs closed. He's always got his legs crossed over. Every time you watch an interview with Bill Gates, he's always sitting with his legs closed. I just can't trust a man that does that. It's almost like he's trying to create the appearance of a non-threatening, benevolent figure. And for me, I just don't really buy that aspect of it. So this is why I think it's important to cover all the bases to see if there are any patterns that emerge from the way he ran Microsoft to his philanthropic work. I like to get detailed in my research, and I don't really buy into speculation and rumour, which is based on some internet fringe theory. To understand the full story, it's important to start at the very beginning. So hopefully it helps explain a few things that will be reoccurring later in the story. Everyone knows Bill Gates as the entrepreneur/businessman and founder of the world's biggest software manufacturer, Microsoft. The story of Bill Gates begins on the 28th of October 1955. Gates was born William Henry Gates III in Seattle, Washington. Gates is named after his father, William Gates I. Bit of pointless information. So Gates, he grew up in a pretty well-off part of town in an upper middle-class area of Sandpoint, Seattle. His parents were well-off. His father was a notable lawyer, and his mother, Mary Maxwell, was on the board of directors of the First Interstate Bank of Washington and the United Way of America. So is this where Bill Gates gets his business sense from? Did his mother help get his foot in the door of the business world? Gates has an older sister, Christine, and a younger sister named Libby. Pointless info alert coming up. Gates also goes by the name Trey, meaning three, as he is the fourth of the William Gates name. So this may be a sign of divine providence. While he lived in Sandpoint, a very rare weather event happened. A tornado hit the area, damaging the Gates' childhood home when Bill was only 7 years old. By most accounts, Gates had a pretty easy and supportive home life. It has been described in his bio as warm and close, which is very nice for Bill. Bill and his sisters were encouraged from a young age to excel and be competitive in everything they did, from schoolwork to athletic pursuits to hobbies, pretty much. They were also pushed to work towards excellence. So as we're starting to see, before he's even hit his teenage years, he's been instilled with this mindset of working towards goals, pursuing excellence, and to be competitive, which are some of the main traits we see with Bill Gates later on in the story. He was very competitive. As you can imagine, the technology industry back then and even today is highly competitive. Everyone is fighting for a slice of the market. Everyone's trying to get their technology in the hands of consumers. When computers were just getting off the ground in the 70s and 80s, this would have been a highly competitive market. The first ones in the door were the ones that really cemented themselves as pioneers in the computer industry. As I just said, the young Bill Gates has been brought up with this competitive edge that has been instilled in him and his sisters. These traits were instilled at such a young age, it would have been impossible to get rid of them on a psychological level. These are traits that are going to be with him for life, the same way as you see bad habits instilled in children. They're usually the same habits that are carried on into adulthood. So this is the same kind of pattern we're seeing with Bill. Excellence and competitiveness are the two traits that he has been brought up with. So, from early on, Bill separates himself from his siblings, showing his competitiveness in most things that he tries. He organises athletic games at the family's summer home in Puget Sound. The family's obviously very well off if he can afford a summer home. This competitiveness is demonstrated again by his love of board games, of all things. He excels at Risk and Monopoly. So go figure, this could explain a lot. Microsoft was run very competitively and had also been accused of monopolistic practices. So did Bill learn some of these traits and behaviors from the board games. Everyone likes to blame video games for everything these days, but back then you could blame the board games. There is a educational facet to these games too. Risky, you have to be tactical, you have to make tactical decisions to win the game, and Monopoly is much the same. You have to be smart, you have to think 3 steps ahead. You have to outsmart your competitor. So let's fast forward a bit. Gates is very close with his mother. The reason I've included this is, if it wasn't for her, I don't think he would be as successful in Microsoft as he was. Mary has an interest in helping children. This is spurred on after a short teaching career. As outlined before, she had been involved with several corporate boards, the First Interstate Bank of Seattle, which had been started by her grandfather. She was also involved in the boards of the United Way and International Business Machines, also known as IBM, so you start to notice these patterns forming. As I said, she gets involved with charities. She likes to help children in various civic projects. The point of me including this is where the philanthropic seeds may have been sown. Not out of greed or a way to misguide or distract people from his plans to take over the world, but because of his mother's involvement. Mary regularly takes Bill with her when she volunteered her time at the community events and at schools. So to me, I am seeing a very distinctive pattern here. Bill's business future is starting to take shape right from an early age. Mary is a very good teacher. She's instilling these lessons in Bill that it's important for those who have a lot to help those that don't. This is a time where Bill learns a lot about business and charity work, even if it's very subliminal at this stage. He probably wasn't paying huge amounts of attention to it. Probably never occurred to him at this time that he would start a business and take over the planet. But nevertheless, there is a very clear argument to make here that this could be where Bill got his business skills and his ideas from. The same can also be said for his charitable work. So we come to Bill Gates' education. So needless to say, the young Bill Gates is a very smart cookie. He has an appetite for reading, which takes up a fair chunk of his time. On Bill's reading lists are encyclopedias and various reference books on different topics. Bill is around 12 and he's doing pretty well at school, but things aren't with a few hiccups. It is around this time his parents start to worry he is becoming a loner due to him becoming withdrawn and uninterested with the things that boys his age should be interested in. So that's a classic trope there. Genius kid, parents think he's weird or he's not doing what he should be doing, and they start to panic. When he is 13, Bill is transferred to a private school. So I know what you're thinking. Well-off kid goes to a fancy school because of his behavioural problems. There's a little more to that. His parents favoured the public system, but they thought a private school might help him focus better on his studies and might prevent distractions that he might be getting through a public school. He goes to a fancy school in Lakeside. This decision turns out to be the correct one. Bill starts to excel in most of his subjects, especially maths and science. No surprises there. He also shows a keen interest in English and surprisingly drama. That one actually surprised me. He's not who you would think would have an interest in drama, or really English to that matter. I would have thought he would have been a straight maths and science and technology guy, but the drama is surprising. But when I started to think about it, it kind of makes sense. As I said about him wearing very non-threatening, nerdy white guy attire, it helps with the character building. He wouldn't be the first businessman, world leader, or any other high-profile public figure who would have taken drama lessons. Lots of them do to try and fit in and to try and play roles more smoothly in the public eye. This has been done for thousands of years and is nothing new. Now I'm speculating here. Whether Bill Gates knew this, maybe he thought he would be an important person one day and studying drama would have a part of that. Maybe acting the right way in front of the right people is a good business decision a business leader would make, but who knows? That's probably getting a little too ahead of myself, but maybe he just had an interest in drama. That's around here he gets his first exposure to the world of computers. A local computer company donates computer time to the students. This Mothers Club that is affiliated with the Lakeside School has a rummage sale and uses the proceeds to buy a teletype machine so that students can use it. So this is around the 70s, where obviously schools can't afford computer labs and computer bays where every student has access to computers. Having a computer back then is a pretty rare and pretty exclusive thing. So if your school is lucky enough to be able to afford it, that would give you a huge advantage over schools that don't. And also this is a time where computers were stupidly bulky, they were massively oversized and very expensive. This is the genesis of Bill's fascination with computers. He becomes amazed at the potential of computers. A large amount of his time is now focused on what a computer can do and how far he can go with it. He expresses this by writing a tic-tac-toe program in basic computer language, which allows a user to play against a machine. In other words, a very primitive AI program. He graduates in 1973, leaving the school with a very impressive stat score of 1,590 out of 1,600. That is pretty impressive. This fact is used later in his life as a conversation point, which he is all too happy to boast about. So, high school is done and now it's time for college. Bill enrolls in the prestigious Harvard University. With stat scores that high, it wouldn't have been very hard for him to enroll in any of the top universities in the US. The year is 1973, and despite his love of technology, he decides to pursue his studies in law. This could be because his dad was a prominent lawyer. His dad also studied law in one of the prestigious universities. This might explain his decision to take up law instead of science or maths. His uni career is brief. He drops out in 1975, which sends his parents' stress levels up a little bit. However, all is not lost. During his time at Harvard, he spends a lot of time in the computer lab, which would have been pretty new during the 70s, so rather than his law classes. Gates doesn't take uni that seriously. This is also another trait you see with very successful people. University is merely a distraction and not really a priority. A lot of billionaires have dropped out of college or even high school. There is something about the way the education system is set up and the way it's run that doesn't agree with people who think outside the box. So Gates doesn't take uni that seriously. He makes do with average grades and very minimal sleep. That's also another reoccurring trait with highly successful people, is they always get very poor to very average grades in university. It's usually the ones that do really well are the ones that don't really go that far. So he leaves Harvard in order to pursue his business Microsoft with his longtime friend Paul Allen. So now we come to another key character in the Gates tale, and this is Paul Allen, friend and co-founder of Microsoft. Allen was a few years older than Gates, but they both formed a friendship over their shared love of computers. Gates and Allen meet in Lakeside High School and hit it off straight away. In my opinion, this is where the counterbalance begins. Paul Allen and Bill Gates' personalities are pretty much polar opposites of one another. Gates is combative, he can be aggressive, and at times he can be just plain arrogant. Paul Allen, on the other hand, is shy and reserved. Gates and Allen are very much the yin and yang to one another. So I found an article on CNBC.com entitled Microsoft co-founders Bill Gates and Paul Allen got busted in high school for exploiting a bug in the computer system. Published July 2nd, 2019 by Kathleen Elkins. Microsoft co-founders Bill Gates and Paul Allen first met as teenagers in the late 60s at Lakeside School in Seattle, when Gates was in the 8th grade and Allen was in the 10th. It was a computer terminal that first brought us together, Gates said of his late friend at the Forbes Philanthropy Summit in New York, where Allen was posthumously awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award for philanthropy. Our school, Lakeside, held a rummage sale and used the proceeds to buy a teletype terminal where we obsessed with it. Computer terminals were rare at the time, and as a result, it was really expensive to use. $40 an hour, Gates said. The only way for us to get computer time was by exploiting a bug in the system. They eventually got busted, he added, but that led to our first official partnership between Paul and me. We worked out a deal with the company to use computers for free if we would identify problems. The friends continued working together after high school in 1974. The summer after Gates' freshman year at Harvard, they were both computer programmers at software company Honeywell. And in 75, when Gates was 19, he dropped out of his sophomore year of college to launch Microsoft, now $1 trillion company with Allen. Gates, who stepped down as Microsoft CEO in 2000 and now runs one of the world's biggest non-profits with his wife Melinda, owes a lot to high school. If there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft, he said in a 2005 speech at Lakeside School. And without Allen, Gates said after his former peer and friend died of cancer last year, personal computing would not have existed. Quick interesting article about the friendship of Gates and Allen. So back to it. Despite the conflicting personality of Gates and Allen, they get along pretty well and spend much of their time coming up with programs and playing around with computers. From time to time, the two would clash and get into arguments over the leadership of the computer lab and engineering problems. There was an incident where Allen banned Gates from the computer lab due to an argument that had gotten out of hand. There is an amusing story of these two getting into trouble in high school when they had their computer privileges taken away from them, after they had exploited a systems glitch in order to get free computer access from the local company that had donated a computer time to the school. As it turned out, when they had served their time, they offered to debug the program to get back into the computer lab. Gates even develops a payroll program for the computer company and hacks a school-based schedule program. So let's go back to 1970. Gates is 15 and the pair form a business partnership, starting a business together. They develop a traffic monitoring program called Trafo Data, which monitored traffic patterns in the Seattle area. As a result of their efforts, they earned themselves a nice little $20,000 profit, which at the time would have been a fucking lot of money, which is even more money to a 15-year-old. That's not bad for a one-time deal. Both Gates and Allen wanted to start a business, but Gates' parents had insisted he finish school and then complete a college degree, in this case the law degree, which he starts but never ends up finishing. Gates and Allen go to separate universities. Allen attends Washington State. The pair stay connected, which back then would probably have been easier said than done, given that there were no mobile phones, no text messaging or computers, email, any of that shit. Allen also drops out of college and moves to Boston after he gets a job for Honeywell. So at this point in history, the future has been set. Destiny has intervened. Allen gets a copy of Popular Electronics magazine. He shows it to Gates, but more specifically, he shows him an article about the Altair 8800 mini computer kit. Gates and Allen become fascinated by this new piece of technology and its potential for the computing world. At this point in time, opportunity is knocking. Gates and Allen use the opportunity to call the company Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems, also known as MITS, who made the Altair, which is based out of New Mexico. Gates and Allen ring the company and tell them that they have developed a basic software program capable of running the Altair system. This is a pattern and a tactic that Bill will repeat in the future with Microsoft. In reality, however, no such program even existed. They didn't even have a Altair to play around with, let alone try and write programs for. However, the brilliance in this move was Gates and Allen were testing the market by contacting the manufacturer directly to see if there was any interest in a program for the Altair at all. So rather than invest their time and effort, money and resources in developing a product that may or may not sell, they decide to ring up the company direct, talk to the guy in charge, and offer their services to write a program for their computer. It's a pretty fucking smart idea. So look at all those companies that go straight to research and development. They spend years and years of their time and effort coming up with ideas and coming up with a product or a service to try and sell to a company, only to have it rejected because someone's either beaten them to it or the company's just not interested because they don't believe it can work. For anyone interested in starting a business, that is a very good tactic to try. Test the waters before you jump in. It also opens them up to a very lucrative business deal. It would make them the producers of a cutting-edge technology product. This pattern is used by Gates later on in Microsoft. As I mentioned before, this is a pattern he repeats again and again. So, Ed Roberts. Ed Roberts was the president of MITS. He was very impressed by the proposal by Gates and Allen and asked the pair for a software demo. So as I said, it's a very good business move to contact the company. This is where the plan backfires a bit. Roberts wants a software demonstration for a piece of software that doesn't exist. So now they've made all these promises that they can come up with this product The boss wants a demonstration before he commits to buying. So it goes without saying, the next 2 months were pretty hectic for Gates and Allen. They had to hit the ground running. They come up with the software in the Harvard Computer Lab. So this is also smart. They're not outlaying any money for their own computers or their own space to come up with this computer program. They're using the resources available to them, which is using it for free in the Harvard Computer Lab. Paul Allen drives across the country down to New Mexico for the demonstration. The problem is the software hadn't been tested on the LTR system. As I mentioned before, the pair didn't have an LTR computer system to test it on, so they were basically flying blind. They were throwing a Hail Mary and hoping that it would work out without a hitch. It's a very ballsy fucking move to make, but it's one that ultimately pays off. Fortunately for Gates and Allen, it worked as it was promised. This in turn gets Allen a job at MITS. This is the same time as Gates decides to drop out of college and joins Allen at MITS. It's at this time the pair form Microsoft. It had originally had a hyphen in the middle, which was later changed. The original name was Micro-Soft, which for obvious reasons it sounds better as Microsoft rather than Micro-Soft. It was too much computer language specific. So Microsoft gets its name from the microcomputer and software, hence the hyphen in the spelling. So now we come down to the 80s. It's smooth sailing until 1983 when Allen leaves Microsoft after he is diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, a form of cancer. After a year of solid treatment, the cancer goes into remission. However, it was too much for Allen to return to Microsoft. This leads Allen to quit the company and pursue his philanthropic projects and other areas of business. There are a lot of rumours around this episode, largely rumours that Gates had Allen pushed out of the company. Would Gates really kick his friend out of a company that he helped build? Maybe, maybe not. As we know, he's very competitive. He can be combative and he can be aggressive. This is all speculation, but maybe all those fights that Gates and Allen had got into had convinced Bill that he was better off running the company by himself, unopposed by Allen. Maybe he had one direction he saw the company going and Allen had his own version of how he thought Microsoft was going to go. Maybe he saw Allen as the weaker link in the chain and decided to get rid of him before it turned into a problem in the future. Others see it as a life-changing event that made Allen think differently about his life and what was really important to him. And that's probably more likely because this happens to a lot of people who have near-death experiences. They reprioritize and refocus what is really important. Maybe he just didn't see any point to continue with Microsoft. Maybe it hadn't become important. Maybe he thought Microsoft would be better off without him. He may have thought that Bill could have run the company better than him. Bill was more driven after all. Maybe he thought that if I've got my money, I can reinvest it in other businesses and areas that interest me. Maybe I can make a difference. But who knows? That's just me speculating. Gates, the business guru. The deal with MITS had paid off and earned Microsoft a nice fee and a very nice royalty package. However, Gates spots a very big problem, and it's his foresight here that sets up his success and competitiveness with Microsoft in the years to come. The output wasn't matching the input. Overheads weren't matching up. There was only a small percent, around 10% of Altair users who were actually paying for the basic software. This is due to a few things. First being that the Altair was popular mainly with computer hobbyists and not the general public. This was an issue largely because a majority of the copies were gathered pre-sale, which were later copied and distributed among computer nerds and the computer community for nothing. This did not sit well with Gates, and rightfully so. If I had spent all this time and effort coming up with a product, I would want people to pay for it too. Bill's got bills, he's got to eat. Whether you like the guy or not, he did work hard, and if you work hard, you deserve to be compensated. So he looked at this as theft. Gates, as any business person will tell you, they start a business to make money and not lose it. Gates is no different. He saw the product he made as an item that was intended for sale and not to be given out for free, even if the primitive nature of the program did make it rather easy to copy. This inspires Gates to write a very famous open letter to computer hobbyists of the world in 1976. In the letter, Gates explains that using software and not paying for said software would prevent good software from being written. Aren't we all waiting for good Microsoft software to be written still? That's a joke, I don't use Microsoft. Not surprisingly, this pisses a lot of computer people off. The backlash doesn't deter Gates from sticking to his guns. He uses the prevention of good software statement / innovation as a defense, as a blueprint when Gates and Microsoft are brought to trial later on. Gates' combative nature is shown in full force while he is working with MITS. Gates and Roberts don't see eye to eye on much, which results in very heated shouting rallies with one another. This also led to a lot of friction when developing software and the direction the company was going. Roberts thought Gates was spoiled and obnoxious. So going back to what I said about Gates having Allen removed from the company, this is another prime example of how aggressive Bill Gates can be. MITS is not even Gates' company, yet he is getting into very heated arguments over the direction of the company. So you would think that Ed Roberts would have sole right on the direction of the company, not Gates. Gates is just an employee after all. Why is Bill getting involved with corporate decisions? Did he see himself as a valuable part of this company that was too good to be replaced because he was the guy smart enough to come up with a program, and did that give him right to dictate the way a company would go? That's all speculation, but from my perspective, this is what this episode seems like. Ed Roberts' experience with Gates leads him to leave MITS in 1977 and return to Georgia, where he attends medical school and becomes a doctor. So things kind of worked out for Roberts. So Gates and Allen are by themselves. The new owners of MITS were sued by the pair in order to keep their Microsoft software rights. However, that's all well and good to protect the creation that you have come up with and to hold on to the rights. However, at the same time, Microsoft were writing programs for other companies. And that might not seem like a big problem, but if you have depending on the stipulations of the deal with MITS, this may or may not have been prohibited. Gates and Allen were going behind the backs of MITS to develop software and programs for competitors. So there's a very moral grey zone in that. So it's now 1979. Gates moves operations from New Mexico to Bellevue in Seattle. It is still early on in Microsoft's development. Gates and his 25 employees have a great deal of work and responsibility ahead of them, covering every area of the business, from research and development, marketing, distribution, and manufacturing. Things were a little turbulent at first, as most fledgling businesses can probably attest to. But despite this, the company makes $2.5 million by 1979. Even by today's standards, $2.5 million is a decent return. So back in 1979, that was a lot of fucking money. So Gates takes on leadership duties of the company, naming himself head of the company, also taking on the role of spokesperson. All of this was at the age of 23, which makes it even more impressive. Gates being the control freak he is, this wasn't enough. He also oversaw and reviewed every piece of code that was released for sale. It wasn't uncommon for him to even rewrite code if he didn't measure up to his standards. So he's also the quality control officer. And this is a job he could have easily delegated to any one of his employees, but he chooses to quality control every piece of code that is released by Microsoft. You could look into that as, he definitely is a control freak. You could also look at this as Gates being so invested in the company that he would not let a substandard Microsoft product leave the factory if it wasn't up to his standards. This is another trait you see with many billionaires and business owners. They get so personal in their business that it becomes obsessive. It's the 80s now, and the computer industry is growing and on the rise to be the next big thing in business. It is a time of Apple, IBM, Intel. The market was competitive, which fueled Gates to take Microsoft even further. During this time, he travels regularly, showing off Microsoft's capabilities at events and product launches all over the country. His mother, Mary, would tag along as he did with her many years before. Mary's relationship with the board members of various companies, one of which being IBM, paved the way for Bill to get his foot in the door. It was due to her that he met the CEO of IBM. It's late 1980s. IBM was on the hunt for software that would serve as an operating system on their PCs. I'll give you 3 guesses who they asked for that, and once again convinced the board that Microsoft could fulfill their needs. Only problem, like the deal he made with MITS, no such software existed or was even in development. This is another calculated chess move by Gates, another very ballsy and outlandish claim that may or may not come back to bite him. Bill buys an operating system designed for a similar competitor computer system and goes behind IBM's back, and strikes an exclusive licensing deal with the software company that makes Microsoft the owner of that piece of software. So once again, Bill's making deals behind people's backs. So whether he thinks he can get away with this, or he thinks he is that smart that gives him the right to go behind people's back, or maybe he is trying to monopolize and control the whole industry by getting access to everybody else's operating systems, and making Microsoft the sole producer of programs for all these different computer companies. So whether he's playing a long-term game or this is just another case of opportunity knocks and he isn't going to miss out on a business deal. Whatever side of the coin you land on, it can be interpreted several different ways, and it just really depends on what side of the coin you land on. So this unsurprisingly lands Gates in court. This isn't the first time, and it's definitely not the last time. IBM sues for withholding important information. This is another pattern that repeats further down the line. A settlement is reached out of court for an undisclosed sum, which in other words is a lot of fucking money Bill would have paid. Later, Gates denies any wrong action on his part. Once again, that can be interpreted several ways. Is he just a sociopath that just admits and acknowledges no fault of his own? Maybe he doesn't see his actions as wrongful. Maybe his feelings towards IBM were so benevolent that he just saw them as a deserving victim of his greed or his business deal, whatever way you want to look at it. If you want to look at that from the sociopathic angle, this is largely what sociopaths do. They have no remorse for their victims, whether this be CEOs that are running companies or serial killers. Maybe this was just fun for him, who knows? That's not a character assassination, that's just speculation as to the mindset of why he keeps doing this. This is the second time that he's gone behind a company's back, and like his lawsuits, this is not going to be the last. On the other hand, is this just him being a very competitive, very aggressive businessman? This is also not an isolated case from Microsoft. Many businesses have pursued deals like this, gone behind people's backs because they can make money and because they think that they can't get caught. There's a very eerie mindset between sociopaths and highly successful business people, and just Western business practices in general. We can rip you off because that's how business has always been done. That's how it's always going to be done. That's how it has been done, and that's how it's going to be done. So we don't feel bad for ripping you off. Look at the way the banks treat customers. The banking system is one of the most corrupt organisations on the planet, yet it keeps getting away with crimes against citizens every day. Because a lot of the people that knowingly or unknowingly rip off the people they're trying to serve do it because they're under the pretense that that's just how business is done. And this could be seen as a very similar case. So what Gates does next is a brilliant but very cunty business move. Microsoft has to adapt the software so that it is compatible with the PC IBM is releasing. Gates gets a $50,000 fee, which is the same amount he pays for the original software. But, there is always a but, IBM wants the source code, which would give them the control of the software. Gates isn't letting it go that easy. He counters the offer, citing that IBM pay a licensing fee for copies of the software that are sold with the PC. It's a very calculated, but at the same time it's a very risky move on Bill's part. IBM is a much bigger company than Microsoft at this stage. They have deeper pockets, they have more lawyers, so he is really punching above his weight with this. Unlike MITS, which is making computers for hobbyists, IBM is a massive company by this stage. They were one of the first in the computer game. They're well established while Microsoft is still in its infancy. So once again, an agreement is reached. The deal allows Microsoft to license the MS-DOS software to any rival PC maker based on the fact that other copies would clone the IBM PC. At the same time, Microsoft brings out Softcard, allowing BASIC to be used on the Apple II. I should have explained this before, but BASIC, if you don't know already, is a high-level programming computer language. It stands for Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, according to Wikipedia. Moving along, business explodes from 79 to 81, with more staff being hired, taking Microsoft's employee roster from 25 in the late 70s to 128, with the company's revenue rising from 2.5 million to 16 million. Even by today's standards, that is a fucking good number. If that was a business today and you had made $16 million in your first three years, that is a very good number. We're talking about the late 70s and early 80s, so that is a very healthy number indeed. So, Microsoft goes global in 1983. Microsoft offices are open in Great Britain and Japan. A massive 30% of the world's computers are running on the Microsoft software, which is a huge fucking number. 30% of the world's computers. And this is 1983. However, there are stormy skies on the horizon for Gates. Now we enter the new threat to Microsoft and Gates' empire. This being one of my favourite tech people and one of my favourite modern figures, Steve Jobs. Love him or hate him, like Gates, he's a genius, he's a visionary. Yeah, he had his ups and downs, he had his personality traits, but the guy knew how to market. The Gates-Jobs rivalry is legendary, which on its own warrants its own show. So I'll keep this brief. Gates and Jobs in their early years worked on a few projects together. Jobs invited Gates to help with software development for the early Macs. Jobs and Gates, which kind of has a funny ring to it, shared a lot of their early innovations. Even their development teams worked on the Apple and Microsoft projects with names from both systems being shared on the separate operating systems. It's through the Apple-Microsoft collaboration that the idea of Windows is born. And it also is the same collaboration which Gates saw as the biggest threat to the MS-DOS operating system and to Microsoft in general, and this being Mac's user-friendly interface. It broke the barrier of what was at the time seen as a computer nerd-only operating system. So the biggest difference is the Microsoft operating system at the time didn't use a graphic interface, which meant that you'd type things into a computer and it would come out in computer code, but when you would print it, it would then be translated into what you had actually typed on a computer or something along those lines. Apple, on the other hand, were using a graphic interface for their Macs, which allowed a smoother, more user-friendly experience, which what you saw on the screen is what you got, which made it easy for people who had never used a computer before, who weren't really tech-savvy, weren't really computer people, to be comfortable using a computer for the first time. And this is an area that Apple still takes a lot of pride in today. So once again, Gates promises software that doesn't yet exist. He doesn't make a deal with Apple or Steve Jobs. He doesn't make any promises for software to help with the Mac. However, he does take another very big risk in the form of an ad campaign. An ad campaign is launched announcing a brand new Microsoft operating system, which uses a graphic interface, also known as Windows. One thing I will comment on here is if Gates didn't see Steve Jobs as a threat and he wasn't so combative and so aggressive with his ideas for Microsoft, protecting his ideas and trying to get one up on the competition, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates could have been really good friends. Both their personalities are their biggest opponents. Now think of what could have been achieved if these two could get along. Just think of where we would be with computers. Not just for Apple or for Microsoft. If both brands function separately but, could use each other's ideas freely and without suing each other, imagine the technological innovations these two could come up with. Whether you love them or hate them, they are geniuses in their own right. Both men single-handedly revolutionized the computer industry and, to a greater extent, the technology industry. But however, this is not how history turns out. You think of where we could be with the technological achievements of these two. There's also this probably has absolutely nothing to do with it, and it's just me connecting dots. Both of Bill Gates' rivals and business partners both died of cancer, Paul Allen and Steve Jobs. random occurrence, spooky coincidence, or maybe Bill had something to do with it. That was a joke, of course he didn't. It's a pretty common thing, and it's not like any of these people in these industries are that healthy anyway. This is an excerpt from Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Chapter 13, Building the Mac. The journey is the reward. Competition. When IBM introduced its personal computer in August 1981, Jobs had his team buy one and dissect it. The consensus was that it sucked. Chris Espinosa called it a half-assed, hackened attempt, and there was some truth to that. It used old-fashioned command line prompts and didn't support bitmapped graphical displays. Apple became cocky, not realizing that corporate technology managers might feel more comfortable buying from an established company like IBM rather than one named after a piece of fruit. Bill Gates happened to be visiting Apple headquarters for a meeting on the day the IBM PC was announced. He didn't seem to care, he said. It took them a year to realize what had happened. Reflecting its cheeky confidence, Apple took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal with the headline, "Welcome, IBM, seriously." It cleverly positioned the upcoming computer battle as a two-way contest between the spunky and rebellious Apple and the establishment Goliath IBM. Conveniently regulating or irrelevancing companies such as Commodore, Tandy and Osborne that were doing just as well as Apple. Throughout his career, Jobs liked to see himself as an enlightened rebel pitted against evil empires, a Jedi warrior or a Buddhist samurai fighting the forces of darkness. IBM was his perfect foil. He cleverly cast the upcoming battle not as a mere business competition, but as a spiritual struggle. If for some reason we make some giant mistakes and IBM wins, my personal feeling is that we are going to enter sort of a computer dark ages for about 20 years, he told an interviewer. Once IBM gains control of a market sector, they almost always stop innovation. So this kind of goes back to that innovation argument that Gates made. Even 30 years later, reflecting back on the competition, Jobs cast it as a holy crusade. IBM was essentially Microsoft at its worst. They were not a force for innovation, they were a force for evil. They were like AT&T or Microsoft or Google is. Strong words with a lot of foresight. And a lot of what he said is true, or came true, as in the case of Google. Right, this is also from the Steve Jobs book by Walter Isaacson, under the chapter Gates and Jobs. Gates was good at computer coding, unlike Jobs, and his mind was more practical, disciplined, and abundant, and analytical processing power. Jobs was more intuitive and romantic, and had a greater instinct for making technology usable. Design, delightful, and interfaces friendly. He had a passion for perfection, which made him fiercely demanding, and he managed by charisma and scattershot intensity. Gates was more methodical. He had held tightly scheduled product review meetings where he could cut to the heart of the issue with lapidary skill. Both could be rude, but with Gates, who early in his career seemed to have a typical geek's flirtation with the fringes of the Asperger's scale, the cutting behaviour tended to be less personal. Based more on intellect, incisiveness than emotional callousness, Jobs would stare at people with a burning, wondering intensity. Gates sometimes had trouble making eye contact, but he was fundamentally humane. Each one thought he was smarter than the other one, but Steve generally treated Bill as someone who was slightly inferior, especially in matters of taste and style, said Andy Hertzfeld. Bill looked down on Steve because he couldn't actually program. From the beginning of their relationship, Gates was fascinated by Jobs and slightly envious of his mesmerizing effect on people. But he also found him fundamentally odd and weirdly flawed as a human being, and he was put off by Jobs' rudeness and his tendency to be either in the mode of saying you were shit and trying to seduce you. For his part, Jobs found Gates unnervingly narrow. He'd be a broader guy if he had dropped acid once or gone off to an ashram when he was younger, Jobs once declared. The differences in personality and character would lead them to opposite sides of what would become the fundamental divide in the digital age. Jobs was a perfectionist who craved control and indulged in the uncompromising temperament of an artist. He and Apple became the exemplars of a digital strategy that tightly integrated hardware, software, and content into a seamless package. Gates was a smart, calculating, and pragmatic analyst of business and technology. He was open to licensing Microsoft's operating system and software to a variety of manufacturers. After 30 years, Gates would develop a grudging respect for Jobs. He really never knew much about technology, but he had an amazing instinct for what works, he said. But Jobs never reciprocated by fully appreciating Gates' real strengths. Bill is basically unimaginative and has never invented anything, which is why I think he's more comfortable now in philanthropy than technology, Jobs said unfairly. He just shamelessly ripped off other people's ideas. That was from the book Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Steve Jobs accusing Bill Gates of ripping things off. As much as I like Steve Jobs, there is some debate whether he actually designed and developed the first Mac. So, once again, Gates calls everyone's bluff. It's a ballsy move. Luckily for Bill, 30% of computer users were using Microsoft. This gave him a slight edge over the newer, less proven operating systems. Pretty much people are lazy and unwilling to change. They would rather wait for an operating system they're already comfortable with rather than learning how to use a new one. So it's now 2 years later, it's 1985, and Windows finally comes out. However, there were some striking similarities between the new Windows operating system and the 2-year-old Mac system. As I mentioned before, Microsoft's development team worked with Apple's and vice versa. So there might have been a little lifting of certain ideas from certain departments. Gates, being the ruthless businessman, spotted a weakness and he exploited it, as he has before. While Apple engineers were working on making Microsoft software compatible with Apple, the Microsoft team had full access to all of Apple's tech. Gates had warned Jobs that they should patent the software. Jobs, being the hardware man that he was, ignored this, and the rest is history. Gates ripped off Apple. Apple threatened to sue. Microsoft threatened to delay the crossover software, which led to another court battle, which Microsoft won, proving in court that both operating systems, however similar, were in fact both very different, citing the difference in system functions. Bill Gates is known for his competitive reputation. It's all taken from biography.com. It's a very well-rounded website and provides a very unbiased biography of characters throughout history. Despite the success of Microsoft, Gates never felt totally secure, always checking on the competition over his shoulders. Gates developed a white-hot drive and competitive spirit. Gates' assistant reported coming to work early to find someone sleeping under a desk. She considered calling security or the police until she discovered it was Gates. Gates' intelligence allowed him to see all sides of software industry, from product development to corporate strategy. When analysing any corporate move, he developed a profile of all the possible cases and ran through them, asking questions about anything that could possibly happen. He expected everyone in the company to have the same dedication. His confrontational management style became legend, as he would challenge employees and their ideas to keep the creative process going. An unprepared presenter could hear, "That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard," from Gates. This was much a test of rigour of the employee as it was Gates' passion for his company. He was consistently checking to see if the people around him were really convinced of their ideas. So that's taken from biography.com. This is where I got all the biographical information on Bill Gates. Unfortunately, this leads to more court time for Bill Gates and for Microsoft. What follows has become renowned in the story of Microsoft, and that is the antitrust lawsuits, aka the anti-competition lawsuit. It's now 1989. The computer industry is not the new kid on the block anymore. It is a fully fledged industry that is only getting bigger and bigger. IBM leads many of Microsoft's competitors and develops a new operating system to replace by what is this time a very ancient operating system in the form of MS-DOS. They come up with the operating system 2, taking away the dependence on Microsoft. Like usual, Gates is unfazed by this and goes full steam ahead with Windows, looking for new applications for the program. Microsoft Office is launched in '89 to record sales, selling more than 100,000 copies in just 2 weeks. Unfortunately, the new program doesn't work very smoothly with OS 2, despite the fact that it is supposed to be compatible with all Microsoft products. Well, where have we seen this before? OS 2 goes the way of the dinosaur and is pretty much all but forgotten. Is this a happy accident that worked out well for Microsoft, or is it by design? As we've seen by Bill's reputation, he's very methodical and he's very calculating. It wouldn't surprise me if he did engineer a way to take OS 2 off the chessboard altogether. He's smart enough and he's calculating enough to pull something like that off. But once again, I'm speculating. Microsoft now had a monopoly on the operating system for pretty much every PC. At this time, Apple was about the only computer manufacturer that had its own operating system that didn't rely on Microsoft. The Federal Trade Commission thought there was monopolistic practices going on and launched an investigation into Microsoft. The Trade Commission and Department of Justice continued to look into Microsoft throughout the 90s. This wasn't really just an isolated case, and it was something that went on for, as we see, over a decade. The Trade Commission thought there was something to hide and dedicated a lot of time and resources into uncovering it. There were allegations that Microsoft had made unfair deals with manufacturers who use Microsoft software in their computers. But that still isn't all. There were more charges claiming that Microsoft had forced manufacturers to sell Internet Explorer as a condition for selling the Windows operating system with their computers. Yeah, so they're twisting these companies' arms to use their software and stipulating that certain changes need to be made if they want to keep it that way. Very dodgy indeed. The charges were serious enough that the company was facing a breakup of its operating system and its software development departments. So Gates goes to bat the same way he always does when him or Microsoft were brought to trial. He defends the charges and claims, as he did the last time, that the restrictions were a threat to innovation. A settlement was reached which prevented the breakup of the departments. Gates is a slippery little fucker. He gets out of trouble once again. He takes the spotlight off of Microsoft's negative publicity by making some comedic appearances dressed as everyone's favourite Vulcan, Spock. At trade shows, he also makes family-friendly commercials, highlighting just how good and wholesome Microsoft is as a company. So basically, for the remainder of the 90s, he runs the company and fights the charges at the same time. This is very ballsy. So by this time, you can definitely see a pattern forming by the way he runs his company. Gates is fucking ruthless. He's not going to let anyone or anything stand in the way of his creation. So this is from the Wikipedia entry under the Microsoft antitrust allegation suit, as it's a very complex issue just on its own. And it's something that I think warrants a bit more information. Gates had primary responsibility for Microsoft's product strategy from the company's founding in 1975 until 2006. He gained a reputation for being distant from others. An industry executive explained in 1981 that Gates is notorious for not being reachable by phone and for not returning phone calls. That's not unusual. Most billionaires, guys like Elon Musk, are probably not reachable by phone either. They're too busy, they're too invested in their companies to worry about that type of shit. So that's not a huge character flaw, really. I mean, hell, I'm not even that reachable by phone most times. An Atari executive recalled that he showed Gates a game and defeated him 35 of 37 times. When they met again a month later, Gates won or tied every game. He had studied the game until he solved it. That is a competitor. And that also highlights just his competitive nature, which once again goes back to the traits that were instilled in him in his early childhood. Gates met regularly with Microsoft senior managers and program managers, and the managers described him as being verbally combative. He also berated them for perceived holes in their business strategies or proposals that placed the company's long-term interests at risk. He interpreted presentations with such comments as, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," and why don't you just give up your options and join the Peace Corps? The target of outbursts would then have to defend the proposal in detail until Gates was fully convinced. When subordinates appeared to be procrastinating, he was known to remark sarcastically, I'll do it over the weekend. During Microsoft's early years, Gates was an active software developer, particularly in the company's programming language products. But his primary role in most of the company's history was as manager and executive. He's not officially been on a development team since working on the TRS-80 Model 100, but he wrote code that shipped with the company's products as late as 1989. Jerry Pournelle wrote in 1985 when Gates announced Microsoft Excel. Bill Gates likes the program, not because it's going to make him a lot of money, although I'm sure it will do that, but because it's a neat hack. On June 15, 2006, Gates announced that he would transition out of his role at Microsoft to dedicate more time to philanthropy. He divided his responsibilities between two successors when he replaced Ray Ozzie in charge of management and Craig Mundy in charge of long-term product strategy. Antitrust litigation. Gates giving the disposition at Microsoft on August 27, 1988. Gates approved of many decisions that led to the antitrust litigation over Microsoft's business practices. In the 1988 United States v. Microsoft case, Gates gave deposition testimony that several journalists characterized as evasive. He argued with examiner David Bose over the contextual meaning of words such as compete, concerned, and we. Later in the year, when portions of the videotape disposition were played back in court, the judge was seen laughing and shaking his head. Businessweek reported early rounds of his disposition show him offering obfuscatory answers and saying, "I don't recall," which is pretty much the default answer of any industry leader or billionaire that gets brought to court. They always claim they don't recall. Back to the article. So many times that the presiding judge had to chuckle. Worse, many of the technology chief's denials and pleas of ignorance were directly refuted by prosecutors, with snippets of emails that Gates both sent and received. Yep. Another public figure caught up in emails. When will they learn? Gates later said that he had simply resisted attempts by Bose to mischaracterize his words and actions. Did I fence with Bose? I plead guilty, rudeness to Bose in the first degree. Despite Gates' denial, the judge ruled that Microsoft had committed monopolization, trying and blocking competition, each in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Very interesting indeed. So as you can see, he's not the squeaky clean businessman that a lot of people think he is. And there's another sub-article on Wikipedia, United States versus Microsoft Corporation. Was a noted American antitrust law case in which the US government accused Microsoft of illegally maintaining its monopoly position in the PC market, primarily through legal and technical restrictions it put on the abilities of PC manufacturers, OEMs, and users to install Internet Explorer and use other programs such as Netscape and Java, which I think are both pretty much died in the arse. At trial, the district court ruled that Microsoft's actions constituted unlawful monopolization under Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, and the U.S. Court of Appeals of the D.C. Circuit affirmed most of the district court's judgment. Yeah. Interesting. That law goes back to 1890, so this is obviously something that has been a concern right throughout U.S. history. The plaintiffs alleged that Microsoft had abused monopoly power on Intel-based personal computers in its handling of operating system and web browser integration. The issue central to the case was whether Microsoft was allowed to bundle its flagship Internet Explorer web browser software with its Windows operating system. Bundling them is alleged to have been responsible for Microsoft's victory in the browser wars, as every Windows user had a copy of Internet Explorer. It was further alleged that this restricted the market for competition web browsers such as Netscape, Navigator, or Opera. Since it typically took a while to download or purchase such software at a store, underlying these disputes were questions over whether Microsoft had manipulated its application programming interfaces to favor Internet Explorer over third-party web browsers. Microsoft's conduct in forming restrictive licensing agreements with original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and Microsoft's Internet in its course of conduct. Microsoft's started at the emerging of Windows and Internet Explorer, which Internet Explorer was the result of innovation and competition. This also goes back to his claims that such things would stop good software from being written. Also, he's also known as his innovation clause. Innovation and competition, and that the two were now the same product and inextricably linked, and that consumers were receiving the benefits of Internet Explorer free. Opponents countered that Internet Explorer was still a separate product which did not need to be tied to Windows, since a separate version of Internet Explorer was available for Mac OS. They also asserted that Internet Explorer was not really free because its development and marketing costs may have inflated the price of Windows. The case was tried before Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson in the United States District Court of the District of Columbia. The DOJ was initially represented by David Boese, or Boese, however you say his name. Compared to the European decision against Microsoft, the DOJ case is focused less on interoperability and more on predatory strategies and market barriers to entry. Okay, so if you want to read up on that, head over to Wikipedia and look up the United States versus Microsoft. So it's now 2000. Bill gives up control of Microsoft and hands over the day-to-day running of the company and CEO duties to longtime Microsoft employee and friend Steve Ballmer. Gates is still steering the ship, so to speak, but not in the direct way he had been. He's now the chief software architect. This is an area which he is more passionate about and also takes him back to his roots playing with code and software. He also remained as chairman of the board. So let's fast forward to 2006, and Gates moves away from full-time work at Microsoft and focuses his efforts towards the Gates Foundation. June 27th, 2008 is Gates' last full day at Microsoft. It's now February 2014. He steps down as chairman and becomes tech advisor at the same time Ballmer is replaced by a younger CEO, Satya Nadella. So that is the history of Bill Gates and Microsoft. So my final thoughts on Gates and his personality. He's driven, he's committed, he strives to excel. That's pretty obvious. He's obviously a business genius. He has his ear to the ground, to the industry. He knows what is coming down the pipe. He knows what's just around the corner. He knows how to exploit it, and he definitely knows how to get out in front of it. What I'm getting from his bio is he's a very savvy businessman. He's not going to let anyone get in his way. He's not going to let anyone stop him or his company from getting to the finish line first. Microsoft is going to be the innovator in all computer software, regardless of what manufacturer is making computers. He obviously couldn't have taken over Apple, but given the chance, he probably would have. I'll leave it up for you to decide what you think of Bill Gates and his personality. Do you think he's a good guy? Do you think he's a bad guy? Do you agree with me? Do you think he's a brilliant and ruthless businessman who will stop at nothing to make sure Microsoft is at the forefront of technology and innovation? Do you think he's a bit dodgy? I know I do. Some of his business practices are less than legal, as we've seen, but then again, he's not the only business person in history that has bent certain rules or completely ignored them altogether to get what they want. So what side of the fence do you sit on? Do you think he's a good guy that has some ruthless and questionable business practices, or do you think he is a villain? Do you think there is more to him? Do you think he would go as far as to try and manipulate world events and microchip populations, patent vaccines to make more money? Do you think he's hiding something? Do you think he's covering something up? I know I definitely think he is hiding something. What that is, I'm not quite sure yet. Would he go as far to try and take over the world? I'm not sure. From this, I'm kind of getting he's more of a ruthless businessman with a couple of tricks up his sleeve who is definitely hiding something. But whether he wants to patent vaccines and make even more money, I'm not sure that's the motivation here. Post-Microsoft, Gates is now a family man, and he pursues his various philanthropic and charitable ventures. As everyone knows, he is married to Melinda French, aka Melinda Gates. She was an employee of Bill's back in 1987 when she was 23 and he was 32. They have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Let's have a look at how wealthy Gates actually is. He made a lot of money from Microsoft sales. However, he tops this in 1986 when he makes Microsoft a publicly traded company with a starting share price of $21. Would have been a good investment back then if you get in. This turns Bill into an overnight millionaire at the age of 31. He retained 45% of the company, which gives Bill $234 million in the bank. It's impressive since he has 234 out of the 520 million shares that Microsoft is worth. The stock price increases to $90.75 per share, which makes Billy Boy a billionaire in 1987. He was in the Forbes annual list of the 400 wealthiest people. By 1999, the share price goes up, and for a moment, his wealth reaches $101 billion. So this brings us to the Gates Foundation. So the Gates Foundation is set up in 1994, which was known then as the William F. Gates Foundation, before being changed to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2000. The foundation is dedicated to education, investment in low-income communities, domestic issues such as support for US students going to college by means of information technology, and world health, which has been at the forefront of media attention lately. This being the microchips and vaccine issues that drive a lot of the conspiracy theories behind Bill Gates. So according to the Wikipedia page on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it is an American private foundation funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. It's based in Seattle, Washington, and was launched in 2000, and is reported to have the largest private foundation in the world, holding $46.8 billion in assets. The primary goals of the foundation are globally to enhance healthcare and to reduce extreme poverty, and in the US to expand educational opportunities and access to information technology. The foundation is controlled by its 3 trustees, Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett. Other principal officers include co-chair William H. Gates Sr., Bill's dad, and Chief Executive Officer Mark Sussman. It had an endowment of $46.8 billion as of December 31st, 2018. The scale of the foundation and the way it seeks to apply business techniques to giving makes it one of the leaders in venture philanthropy. Through the foundation itself, notes that the philanthropic role has limitations. In 2007, its founders were ranked as the second most generous philanthropist in the US, and Warren Buffett the first. As of 2018, Bill and Melinda Gates had donated around $36 billion to the foundation. Since its founding, the foundation has endowed and supported a broad range of social, health, and education developments, including the establishments of the Gates Cambridge Scholarships at Cambridge University. On June 25, 2006, Warren Buffett, then the world's richest person, estimated worth $62 billion, as of April 16, 2008, pledged to give the foundation approximately 10 million Berkshire Hathaway Class B shares, then valued at $3,071 each, before a 50-to-1 stock split in 2010, spread over multiple years through annual contributions, with the first-year donation of 500,000 shares being worth approximately $1.5 billion. Buffett set conditions so that these contributions did not simply increase the foundation's endowment, but effectively work as a matching contribution, doubling the foundation's annual giving, Bloomberg News noted. Buffett's gift came with 3 conditions for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill and Melinda must be alive and active in the administration. It must continue to qualify as a charity, and each year it must give away an amount equal to the previous year's Berkshire gift, plus an additional amount equal to 5% of net assets. Buffett gave the foundation 2 years of abide by the third requirement. The Gates Foundation received 5%, 500,000 of the shares in July 2006, and will receive 5% of the remaining earmarked shares in the July of each following year. 475,000 in 2007, 451 at 250 in 2008. In July 2018, Buffett announced another donation of the company's Class B stock, this time worth $2 billion, to the Gates Foundation. The foundation also has an open access policy. In November 2014, the Gates Foundation announced that they would be adopting an open access OA policy for publications and data to enable the unrestricted access and reuse of all peer-reviewed published research funded by the foundation, including any underlying data sets. This move has been widely applauded by those who are working in the area of capacity building and knowledge sharing. Its terms have been called the most stringent among similar OA policies. As of January 1st, 2015, their open access policy is effective of all new agreements. In March 2017, it was confirmed that the open access policy, Gates Open Research, would be based on the same initiative launched in 2016 by Wellcome Trust. In the Wellcome Opinion Research Policy launched its partnership with the F1000 Research. The Gates Foundation supported Our World in Data, one of the world's largest open access publications. Bill Gates called the publication his favourite website. Our World Data is a scientific online publication based in the University of Oxford that studies how to make progress against large global problems such as poverty, disease, hunger, climate change and inequality. The mission of Our World in Data is to present research and data to make progress against the world's largest problems. So you can head on over to Wikipedia, read up all this stuff for yourself. The foundation itself is pretty interesting, the way it's structured and the way it's run. It also lists all the companies that have made donations to it. There's a lot of varying companies there. So it appears that the foundation does good work and supports a lot of areas that could do with the money and the attention. We've seen before that Bill had been exposed to this kind of charitable work from a young age. Melinda gave Bill the push he needed to follow in his mother's footsteps. This is not a unique model by any means. Richies have been doing this for centuries. This is the same model used by John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. There is some speculation that this is to make up for being a prick to people in the past. So is it a convenient cover or a wild conspiracy theory? Is there any truth to it? Are there ulterior motives at play? He gives a lot of his wealth away. Is he just the nice guy? Like a lot of these billionaires are. Do you have so much money you just need to feel the need to give it to those less fortunate or organisations that need it? In 2000, Bill and Melinda donated $28 billion to form the foundation. Since stepping down from Microsoft, Bill has focused a lot of his attention toward the foundation. He has proposed some radical changes to education and even gives his employees who have a baby 1 year paid leave. It's a pretty good deal by any employer. He's also funded reports into healthcare, education, child mortality rates, malnutrition and the threat of infectious diseases, which tracked the progress into these areas. The disease area is interesting. This has come to light in the last couple of months with coronavirus and COVID-19. He's funded a lot of research into the COVID-19 vaccines, and he's been talking about infectious diseases for years. I think he started talking about them, doing his TED Talks on them in 2015. He's often telling people that besides climate change, pandemics and disease are our most prevalent threat to humanity and will be the biggest issues of the next decade. He's also donated $12 million along with the co-founder of Google, Larry Page, to a universal flu vaccine. You can kind of insert your conspiracy theory with that one. However, these are two people I wouldn't trust. Google likes to track everything people do. They like to, manipulate algorithms to show you what you need, what you think you need. They're always tracking something, listening to people, gathering information on people. And these are the same people donating money to flu vaccinations. So there could be some truth to that after all. He said the funds would be awarded in grants of up to $2 million for individual efforts that are bold and innovative, aiming to begin clinical trials by 2021. There's been much criticism in the donation amount. Critics have said, is $12 million enough? So on the one side of that, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I mean, are these critics putting up their own money? No. They're just criticizing billionaires who aren't giving enough in their eyes. They're probably giving a lot of money to a lot of different organizations. They can't give more to one over another. 12 million is a lot of fucking money. You can get a lot done with that. Others have praised the intentions behind the investment, while Gates indicated that there could be more to come. Gates has also invested 50 million into Alzheimer's research. This one is more personal since it has affected his own family directly. This is a quote by him. "Any type of treatment would be a huge advance from where we are today," he told CNN, adding, "The long-term goal has got to be cure." The next thing he is funding is probably one of the most interesting in my opinion. It's also the most out there. Gates is planning on building a smart city in Arizona. He is putting 80 million of his own money into the project. This is a quote, "Creates a forward-thinking community with communication and infrastructure spine that embraces cutting-edge technology, designed around high-speed digital networks, data centers, new manufacturing technologies and distribution models, autonomous vehicles and autonomous logistic hubs." According to Belmont Partners Real Estate Investment Group, the city will include schools, housing, and all the city's shit that comes with it. That's a big project. Why do it? If I had, 101 billion, I'd probably do it myself. Is this Bill trying to control more stuff? Is it a form of mind control, a societal control? Is he trying to use this as a model that can spread globally, or is he just trying an experiment, or is he generally trying to use this as a model for good? Is he trying to do this to benefit people and to create a better society? Who knows? So all the Bill and Melinda philanthropic work has earned the pair many awards and accolades. This is not surprising. So this brings us to coronavirus. Bill has been on the soapbox for years, telling the world that it is not equipped to deal with a global pandemic, and how right he is. This makes me think, does he know more than he is letting on? As we've seen, he's very good at predicting future models. He's very good at predicting what's to come, what's around the corner, and where things might go. Is he just doing the same now with the virus? If you look back through history, viruses have sprung up at random times all throughout history. But is it really that random? Global pandemics have sprung up at certain points of history for thousands of years, and they probably still will for thousands more. So it's not that big of a stretch to be able to predict what's around the corner. Once you know the modeling and once you know how these cycles work, as I've talked about on the Mayan calendar episodes, you can start to work out what might transpire in the future. There is an eerie connection with Event 201, which I'll be getting into in parts 2 and 3. It seems too convenient and too coincidental that he holds an event and a few months later this happens. Whether it's just good timing, coincidence, something tells me there's a little more to that than meets the eye. So the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust and MasterCard are an odd combo. They team up and give $125 million to fight COVID-19. Going one step further than that, Gates says he and the foundation are prepared to give billions to fight it, including building factories to produce vaccines. Are the vaccines going to have some type of nanotechnology in them? Who knows? Are they going to be a way of tracking people? Is it even a vaccine, or is he going to implant people with microchips? Who knows? If he's going so far to build factories to produce vaccines, chances are it can be outfitted to manufacture anything. So, I'm just going to read a few excerpts from The Road Ahead by Bill Gates. Now, bearing in mind that this book was written in 1995, and you can kind of see how he thinks, how he is able to predict the future as he always has. So maybe this has something to do with the way he thinks about vaccines and the future of global pandemics. It'd be interesting to spot the patterns forming and to see if there is anything to it. So this is taken from page 6, A Revolution Begins. He's talking about the information superhighway. So back in 1995, this was still a new concept. The term highway also suggests that everyone is driving and following the same route. This network is more like a lot of country lanes, where everyone can look at or do whatever his individual interest suggests. Another implication is that perhaps it should be built by the government, which I think would be a major mistake in most countries. But the real problem is that the metaphor emphasizes the infrastructure of the endeavor rather than its applications. At Microsoft, we talk about information at your fingertips. which spotlights a benefit rather than the network itself. A different metaphor that I think comes closer to describing a lot of the activities that will take place is that of the ultimate market. Markets from trading floors to malls are fundamental to human society, and I believe this new one will eventually be the world's central department store. And he's kind of right about that. He doesn't quite predict online shopping, but this is pretty much more or less what he's talking about. You can shop, you can learn, you can pretty much do anything from the comfort of your own home if you have an internet connection and a decent computer or a smartphone. It will be where we social animals will sell, trade, invest, haggle, pick stuff up, argue, meet new people and hang out. When you hear the phrase information highway, rather than seeing a road, imagine a marketplace or an exchange. Think of the hustle and bustle of the New York Stock Exchange or a farmer's market, or of a bookstore full of people looking for fascinating stories and information. All manner of human activities take place, from billion-dollar deals to flirtations. Many transactions will involve money, tender in digital form rather than currency. He's also dead on the money on that one. And with coronavirus, it's the first time in history that cash has been more or less replaced by entirely new forms of currency. It's the first time in the history of currency that money in its physical form is worth less than other forms of currency. In this case, cryptocurrencies and debit cards. Digital information of all kinds, not just as money, will be the new medium of exchange in this market. The global information market will be huge and will combine all of the various ways human goods, services and ideas are exchanged. On a practical level, this will give you broader choices about most things, including how you earn and invest, what you buy and how much you pay for it, who your friends are and how you spend your time with them, and where and how securely you and your family live. Your workplace and your idea of what it means to be educated will be transformed, perhaps almost beyond recognition. Your sense of identity of who you are and where you belong may open up considerably. In short, just about everything will be done differently. I can hardly wait for this tomorrow, and I'm doing what I can to help make it happen. You aren't sure you believe this or want to believe it. Perhaps you'll decline to participate. People commonly make this vow when some new technology threatens to change what they're familiar and comfortable with. At first, the bicycle was a silly contraption, the automobile a noisy intruder, the pocket calculator a threat to the study of mathematics, and the radio the end of literacy. But then something happens. Over time, these machines find a place in our everyday lives because they not only offer convenience and save labour, they can also inspire us to new creative heights. We warm to them, they assume a trusted place beside our other tools. A new generation grows up with them, changing and humanising them. In short, playing with them. The telephone was a major advance in two-way communication, but at first even it was denounced as nothing more than a nuisance. People made uncomfortable and awkward by this mechanical invader in their homes. Eventually, though, men and women realised they were not just getting a new machine, they were learning a new kind of communication. A chat on the telephone wasn't as long or as formal as a face-to-face conversation. There was an unfamiliar and, for many, an off-putting efficiency to it. Before the phone, any good talk entailed a visit and probably a meal that one could expect to spend a full afternoon or evening. Once most businesses and households had telephones, users created ways to take advantage of this unique characteristic of this means of communication. As it flourished, its own special expressions, tricks, etiquette and culture developed. Alexander Graham Bell certainly wouldn't have anticipated the silly executive game of have my secretary get him onto the line before me. As I write, a new form of communication, electronic mail or email, is undergoing the same sort of process, establishing its own rules and habits. So there you go. This is a guy that is obviously very in tune with technology and what forms of technology might be prevalent in people's everyday lives. I mean, this is now 2020, and he's obviously responsible for a lot of huge breakthroughs in computer technology, as what most of this podcast has been about. This is another excerpt. This one I really like because I can really relate to it, being a child of the 80s. And anyone who's listening who was born in the 80s, you probably remember VHS, and if you're older than that, you will definitely remember Betamax and the VHS Betamax war. Perhaps the most famous industry demonstration of the power of positive feedback was the video cassette recorder format battle of the late 1970s and early 80s. The persistent myth has been that the positive feedback alone caused the VHS format to win over beta. Even though beta was technically better, actually early beta tapes only recorded for an hour compared to 3 hours of VHS, not enough for a whole movie or a football game. Customers care more about the tape's capacity than some engineers' specs. The VHS format got off to a small lead over the beta format used by Sony in its Betamax player. JVC, which developed the VHS standard, allowed other VCR manufacturers to use the VHS standard for a very low royalty. As VHS-compatible players proliferated, video rental stores tended to stock more VHS than beta tapes. This made the owner of the VHS player more likely than a beta owner to find a movie she wanted at the video store, which made VHS fundamentally more useful to its owners and caused even more people to buy VHS players. The old video store. I really do feel sorry for this generation because they'll never know what it's like to go to a video store and spend like an hour looking for a videotape, paying $10 for an overnight rental, going home watching it, having to rewind it, take it back to the video shop the next day. All very fuel inefficient, very time inefficient. And then you also got charged for not rewinding it. Now they were definitely the days. This in turn further motivated video stores to stock VHS. Beta lost out as people chose VHS in the belief that it represented a durable standard. VHS was the beneficiary of a positive feedback cycle. Success bred success, but not at the expense of quality. While the duel between the Betamax and VHS formats was going on, sales of pre-recorded video cassettes to US tape rental dealers were almost flat, just a few million copies a year. Once VHS emerged as the apparent standard in about 1983, an acceptance threshold was crossed, and the use of the machines as measured by tape sales turned abruptly upward. That year, over 9.5 million tapes were sold, a more than 50% increase over the year before. In 1984, tape sales reached 22 million. Then in successive years, 52 million, 84 million, and 110 million units in 1987. By which time renting movies had become one of the most popular forms of home entertainment, and the VHS machine had become ubiquitous. This is an example of how a quantitative change in the acceptance level of a new technology can lead to a qualitative change in the role the technology plays. Television is another. In 1946, 10,000 television sets were sold in the US, and only 16,000 in the next year. But then a threshold was crossed, and in 1948 the number was 190,000. In successive years, it was 1 million units, followed by 4 million, 10 million, and steadily up to 32 million sold in 1955. As more television sets were sold, more was invested in creating programming, which in turn further enticed people to buy television sets. And if you remember back to the late 90s, early 2000s with VHS being replaced by DVD. DVD offered obviously a better picture and sound quality, more storage, you could have features, it was more interactive, you had menus, cases were smaller. And when they first came out, they were roughly about the same price as video cassettes when they first came out. I mean, look at all the money people spent on videos, and I know I used to. And now you can pick them up in a second-hand store for 50 cents to a couple of dollars. It's really fascinating to watch the evolution of technology, especially in entertainment technology. Because I think you're just people more tied into entertainment technology. Everyone's watched a videotape or a DVD or a Blu-ray. When not everyone's into computers and communication technology. And that's the other thing, is that then DVD was replaced by Blu-ray, then Blu-ray by HD, by 4K Blu-ray, which hasn't really taken off because it's not really a outstandingly better format than the Blu-ray. It's just a little higher quality. And you only get that benefit if you spent thousands of dollars to get the 4K TV to go with it. And all that for a $20 increase in price. For the first few years after they were introduced, audio compact disc, CD players and discs didn't sell well, in part because it was difficult to find music stores that carried many titles. Then seemingly overnight, enough players were sold and titles were available. And an acceptance threshold was crossed. More people brought players because more titles were available, and record companies made more titles available on CDs. Music lovers preferred the new high-quality sound and convenience of compact discs, and they became a de facto standard and drove LPs out of the record stores. This is another example of how technology can change, but in hindsight, the record is coming back. There's many new artists who are putting out albums onto record. I know my local store where I buy a lot of games and Blu-rays from sell records for about $40 new releases. So they're definitely coming back, and I've even seen record stores opening up in my local area because it's part of the hipster revolution. The young generation doesn't think CDs and MP3s and downloading stuff is cool, so they want to go back to the good old days of vinyl and live out this nostalgic fantasy that they were kind of never a part of. But, hipsters are good for business, I guess, so it's bringing attention back to the record and to that format. And records do sound pretty good. So sticking with entertainment, this is a part of the book I found really interesting, where he kind of predicts where we are now with entertainment and how we view entertainment like movies and television shows. Television has been around for fewer than 60 years, but in that time it has become a major influence in the life of almost everyone in developed nations. But television in some ways was just a replacement for commercial radio, which had been bringing electronic entertainment into homes for 20 years. No broadcast medium will be comparable to what the highway will be like. The highway will enable capabilities that seem magical when they are described, but represent technology at work to make our lives easier and better. Because consumers already understand the value of movies and are used to paying to watch them. Video on demand will be an important application on the information highway. It won't be the first, however. We already know that PCs will be connected long before television sets, and that the quality of movies shown on early systems will not be very high. The system will be able to offer other applications, such as games, electronic mail, and home banking. When high-quality video can be transmitted, there won't be any intermediary VCR. You'll simply request what you want from a long list of available programs. Limited video-on-demand systems are already instilled in some higher-priced hotels, replacing or complementing premium movie channels. Hotel rooms, airports, and even airplanes are great laboratories for all the new highway services that will come later into homes. They offer a controlled environment and an upscale audience for experimentation. Television shows will continue to be broadcast as they are today for synchronous consumption. After they air, these shows, as well as thousands of movies and virtually all other kind of video, will be available whenever you want to view them. You'll be able to watch the new episode of Seinfeld at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night, or at 9:13 p.m., or at 9:45 p.m., or at 11 a.m. on Saturday. If you don't care for his brand of humour, there will be thousands of other choices. Your requests for a specific movie or television program episode will register, and the bits will be routed to you across the network. The information highway will make it feel as though all the immediate machinery between you and the object of your interest has been removed. You indicate what you want, and presto, you got it. And how right he was. I don't think even Bill could have predicted how streaming services dominated the entertainment space. I mean, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Stan, Disney, and pretty much every other company in the world has got their own streaming service now. In a couple of years, they've completely taken over the way we view TV and movies and documentaries. And as everyone knows, they're basically their own production companies. They're not relying on the big studios anymore or network TV to, pass a review board of what they think the television-rated audience likes. They're going straight to the customer. They're putting out shows that are far better than anything we've seen in previous years. In most cases, there are a lot of duds and a lot of shit out there too, but that's all subjective. And look at the rise of Netflix. They went from physical discs to production company to the biggest online streaming service in the world. And now with coronavirus, people are using them more than ever. You got this whole generation that doesn't even know what a VHS or a DVD is. Most of them don't even go to the cinema to watch a movie. Everything is viewed online. Maybe this was to combat downloading, or maybe this is just a natural progression of the entertainment cycle, as Bill calls it. So it's interesting to see where things are going to be in another 5 to 10 years, even 20 years. the rate technology is changing, that's anyone's guess. So back to the book. Movies, television programs, and all sorts of other digital information will be stored on servers, which are computers with capacious disks. Servers will provide information for use anywhere on the network. If you ask to see a particular movie, check a fact, or retrieve your electronic mail, your request will be routed by switches to the server or servers sorting the information. You won't know whether the material that arrives at your house is stored on a server, down the road, or on the other side of the country, nor will it matter. The requested digital data will be retrieved from the server and routed by switches back to your television, personal computer or telephone. Your information appliances, the digital devices, will succeed for the same reason the analog precursors did. They will make some aspects of life easier, unlike the dedicated word processors that brought the first microprocessors to many offices. These information applications will be general-purpose programmable computers connected to the information highway. There's another interesting part in the book where he is referring to HDTV, and it came as a surprise to me just how long it's been around. Bill in 1995 was predicting the HDTV revolution and what the increase in quality might bring. High-definition television, HDTV systems that offer more than 1,000 lines of resolution, which by 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and better colour, have been demonstrated, and they are beautiful to watch. But despite the efforts of the government and industry in Japan, where they were created, HDTV didn't catch on. Because it required expensive new equipment for both broadcasting and receiving, advertisers wouldn't pay extra to fund HDTV, because it didn't make ads measurably more effective. However, HDTV might still catch on, because the highway will allow video to be received at multiple resolutions and aspect ratios. This idea of adjustable resolution is familiar to users of personal computers who can choose the typical resolution of 480, called VGA, or higher resolutions of 600, 768, 1024 and 1200 horizontal lines of resolution, depending on what their monitor and display card can support. He's also bang on the money with that one. I found it really interesting that a new technology such as HD TV was suppressed because of advertising companies. So you got to think of what else has been suppressed due to money, or just because these greedy advertising companies don't want to take a chance on a new technology. They don't want to invest the money that could pretty much revolutionize and change the game in most cases. You got to think of it, how cool it would have been back in the 80s to have HDTV. Think of what we would have now. If HDTVs have really just popped up in the last 20 years, it's interesting to think what it would have been like in 1980 to have a HDTV. Just imagine how good the PlayStation would be now. We'd be on the PS12 already. Pay TV screens and PC screens will continue to improve, to get smaller and improve in quality. Most will be flat panel displays. Yeah, also he was very correct on that one. Long gone are the days of the curved box TVs. Everything's flat screen. It was first plasma, then that got too expensive, and that disappeared, money due to costs. And then it was, what was it, LCD, which is also gone, and LED, and whatever else it's up to these days. One new form will be the digital whiteboard, a large wall-mounted screen, perhaps an inch thick, that will take the place of today's blackboards and whiteboards. It will display pictures, movies, and other visual materials, as well as text and other fine details. People will be able to draw or make lists by writing on them. The computer controlling the whiteboard will reorganize a handwritten list and convert it into one with a readable typeface. These devices will show up first in conference rooms, then private offices, and then even homes. That still hasn't come to fruition yet, but that would be pretty fucking cool, a digital whiteboard. I could do with half a dozen of them in the house. It'd make planning episodes a lot easier. Today's telephone will connect to the same network as the PCs and TVs. Many future phones will have small flat screens and tiny cameras. Otherwise, though, they look more or less like today's instruments. Kitchens will continue to have wall phones because they conserve counter space. You'll sit close to the phone and look at the screen showing the person you are speaking to. Or at a stock picture, he or she has elected to transmit in lieu of live video. Might not be quite there with the phones, but he is definitely on the money with the small flat screen phones with tiny cameras. Pretty much everyone's got one in their pocket these days. Technology. The phone hanging over a dishwater tomorrow will have a lot in common with the set-top box in the living room and the personal computer in the den, but it will assume the form of a phone. Under the hood, all information appliances will have pretty much the same computer architecture. Their exterior forms will be different to match their varying functions. In a mobile society, people need to be able to work efficiently while on the road. 2 centuries ago, travellers often carried a lap desk, a hinged writing board attached to a thin mahogany box with a drawer for pens and ink. When folded, it was reasonably compact, and when opened, it offered an ample writing surface. In fact, the Declaration of Independence was written on a lap desk in Philadelphia, a long way from Thomas Jefferson's Virginia home. The need for a portable writing station is met today by the laptop, a folding lap-sized personal computer. Many people, including me, who work from both home and office, choose a laptop or a slightly smaller computer known as a notebook as their primary computer. These small computers can then be connected to a large monitor and to the corporate network in the office. Notebook computers will continue to get thinner until they are nearly the size of a tablet of paper. It's also eerily close to the money with that. It's funny he doesn't mention quite tablets that we know today, but he's pretty close to it. Notebooks are the smallest and most portable real computers today, but soon there will be pocket-sized computers with snapshot-sized colour screens. When you whip one out, no one will say, "Wow, you have a computer." Now Bill's talking about implications for business. A company should also examine all of its internal processes, such as employee reviews, business planning, sales analysis, and product development, and determine how networks and other electronic information tools can make these operations more effective. There's been quite a shift in the way we think about the use of computers as business tools. When I was a kid, my image of computers was that they were very big and powerful. Banks had a bunch, computers let big airlines keep track of reservations. They were the tools of large organizations and were part of the edge big businesses had over small guys who used pencils and typewriters. But today the personal computer, as the name suggests, is a tool for the individual. Even in a large company, we think of and use a personal computer. Very personal to help us get our job done. Those doing solo work can write, create newsletters and explore new ideas better with a personal computer. A Luddite might ask, if Churchill had used a word processor, would his writing have been better? Would Cicero have given better speeches in the Roman Senate? Some critics have a notion that because great things were achieved without modern tools, it is presumptuous to suggest that better tools might elevate human potential. We can only speculate on how an artist's output might be helped, but it is quite clear that the personal computers improve business processes, efficiency and accuracy. Consider the average reporter. There have been many great journalists through history, but today it's much easier to check facts, transmit a story from the field and stay in touch electronically with news sources. Editors and even readers, plus the inclusion of high-quality diagrams and pictures has become easier. Just look at the presentation of science topics. 20 or 30 years ago, it was unusual to find top-quality scientific illustrations anywhere, except in science books or a glossy specialized magazine such as Scientific American. Today, some newspapers present science stories well in part because they use personal computer software to produce detailed drawings and illustrations rapidly. Too bad a lot of the mainstream networks don't do a lot of fact-checking, except they just seem to make shit up. Everything's fake news until it's being fact-checked. This part I thought was actually particularly relevant to what's happening today. The cost of video conferencing, like that of almost every other computer-driven service, is going to drop as technology and communication costs do. Small video devices using cameras attached to a personal computer or television sets will allow us to meet readily across the information highway, with much higher quality pictures and sound for lower prices. As ISDN connected to PCs becomes popular, video conferences will be as standard a business procedure as using a copier to duplicate a document for distribution is now. Some people worry that by eliminating the subtlety of human dynamics in a meeting, video conferences and shared screens will give corporate gatherings all the spontaneity of a congressional photo opportunity. How will people whisper, roll their eyes at a tedious speaker, or pass notes? Actually, clandestine communication will be simpler at video meeting because the network will facilitate individual communications on the side. Meetings have always had unwritten rules, but when the network is mediating video conferences, some rules will have to become explicit. Will people be able to signal publicly or privately, individually or collectively, that they are bored? To what degree should a participant be allowed to block his or her video or audio from others? Should private side conversations, one PC to another, be permitted over time as we use these facilities? New rules of meeting etiquette will emerge. Home video conferences will naturally be somewhat different. If the conference has only 2 participants, it will amount to a video phone call that will be great for saying hello to your kids when you're out of town, or showing your veterinarian the way your dog or cat limps. But when you're at home, chances are you'll keep cameras off during most calls, especially with strangers. You may choose to transmit a candid photograph of yourself, your family, or something else you believe expresses your individuality, yet protects your visual privacy. It will be something like choosing a message for your answering machine. Live video could be switched on for a friend or when business required it. Video conferencing has been really brought to a head with COVID-19, where pretty much everyone was told to work at home and to do all their meetings and communication via Zoom and Skype. So a few months ago, no one had a fucking clue what Zoom or Skype were, but now everybody seems to know. Now it seems like most of the world's using it. So go figure, Bill was definitely right about that. And this looks like it's going to be something that's going to stay around for a long time. It will also cut down on business expenses. Companies won't have to send employees across country or overseas for face-to-face meetings anymore. You can just do it from home or from the boardroom. Very exciting stuff. So Bill even gives his thoughts on friction-free capitalism. When Adam Smith described the concept of markets in the Wealth of Nations in 1776, he theorized that if every buyer knew every seller's price and every seller knew what every buyer was willing to pay, everyone in the market would be able to make fully informed decisions and society's resources would be distributed efficiently. To date, we haven't achieved Smith's ideal because would-be buyers and would-be sellers seldom have complete information about one another. Not many consumers looking to buy a car stereo have the time or patience to canvass every dealer, and thus are acting on imperfect and limited information. If you bought a product for $500 and you see it advertised in the paper for $300 a week or two later, you feel foolish for overpaying, but you feel a lot worse if you end up in the wrong job because you haven't done thorough enough research. Yeah, very true. That always pisses me off when I overpay pretty much for anything. Even if it's a couple of bucks, it annoys me. A few markets are already working fairly close to Smith's ideal. Investors buying and selling currency and certain other commodities participate in efficient electronic markets that provide nearly complete, instantaneous information about worldwide supply, demand and prices. Everyone gets pretty much the same ideal because news about all offers, bids and transactions speeds across wires and trading desks everywhere. However, most marketplaces are very inefficient. For instance, if you are trying to find a doctor, lawyer, accountant or similar professional, or are buying a house, information is incomplete and comparisons are difficult to make. The information highway will extend the electronic marketplace and make it the ultimate go-between, the universal middleman. Often, the only humans involved in the transaction will be the actual buyer and seller, as the goods for sale in the world will be available for you to examine, compare, and often customize. When you want to buy something, you'll be able to tell your computer to find it for you at the best price offered by any acceptable source, or ask your computer to haggle with the computers of various sellers. Information about vendors and their products and services will be available to any computer connected to the highway. Servers distributed worldwide will accept bids, resolve offers into completed transactions, control authentication and security, and handle all other aspects of the marketplace, including the transfer of funds. This will carry us into a new world of low-friction, low-overhead capitalism, in which market information will be plentiful and transaction costs low. It will be a shopper's heaven. Bang on the money again. eBay, Amazon, Etsy, PayPal, These are all pretty much what he's talking about. So now he's talking about being plugged in at home. There's even illustrations of what a Gates-inspired home might look like. A connected information, a plugged-in connected household. In other words, it's kind of a proto-smart home, which are becoming more increasingly popular today. Modern homes very rarely have external cords. It's usually all internal in the walls, or built in, are designed to facilitate big screen TVs and internet connections. One of the many fears expressed about the information highway is that it will reduce the time people spend socialising. Some worry that homes will become such cosy entertainment providers that we'll never leave them, and that safe in our private sanctuaries will become isolated. Wow, he was disturbingly right with that one. What's happened in the last 6 months? Pretty much everyone's had no choice but to stay inside, and there's a lot of people with mental health problems now because of it. I don't think that's going to happen, and later in this chapter, when I describe the house I'm building, I think I might make my case. The house, which has been under construction for what seems like most of my life, and it seems I've been reading about the construction even longer. It's full of advanced entertainment equipment, such as a small movie theatre and video-on-demand system. It should be an interesting place to live, but I certainly don't plan to stay home all the time. Other people, when they have entertainment flowing into their homes, will also continue to go to theatres just as they visit parks, museums and shops. As behaviourists keep reminding us, we're social animals. We will have the option of staying home more because the highway will create so many new options for home-based entertainment, for communications both personal and professional, and for employment. Although the mix of activities will change, I think people will decide to spend almost as much time out of their homes. In chapter 1, I mentioned dire anti-culture predictions from the past that didn't come about. More recently, in the 1950s, there were those who said movie theatres would disappear and everyone would stay home watching the new invention, television. Pay TV and later movie video rentals provoked similar fears. Why would anyone spend money for parking and babysitters, buy the most expensive soft drinks and candy bars in the world, to sit in a dark room with strangers? But popular movies continue to fill theatres. Personally, I love movies and I enjoy the experience of going out to see them. I don't do it almost every week, and I don't think the information highway will change that. Also kind of true. I mean, the only thing that's really slowed cinemas down recently has been COVID-19 because they closed them. And now with social distancing and all that, there's no new movies coming out, so people have been forced to stay in home watching movies on Netflix and Prime and Hulu and whatever else. And now you have companies like Disney who are not releasing their big theatrical movies in the cinema this year as they had planned to, and are releasing exclusively on their streaming service, which is also cutting out the cinema. It's not great for theatres. I do like going to the movies myself. Yeah, it is expensive, but it is good to see movies on the big screen, especially older movies. And you've got companies like Disney that are just bypassing that because they don't have to spend as much money on advertisement. That saves them $25 million, and they can just go release it straight to streaming. The new communications capabilities will make it far easier than it is today to stay in touch with friends and relatives who are geographically distant. Many of us struggled to keep alive a friendship with someone far away. I used to date a woman who lived in a different city. We spent a lot of time together on email, and we figured out a way we could sort of go to the movies together. We'd find a film that was playing at about the same time in both our cities. We'd drive to our respective theatres, chatting on our cellular phones. We'd watch the movie, and on the way home, we'd use our cellular phones again to discuss the show. In the future, this sort of virtual dating will be better because the movies watching could be combined with a video conference. Yeah, true. I already play bridge on a online system that allows the players to see who else is interested in joining the game because it has a waiting room. Players have a primitive ability to choose the way they want to appear to other players, their sex, hairstyle, body build, etc. The first time I connected to the system, I was in a rush to keep a bridge appointment, and I didn't spend any time setting up my electronic appearance. After my friends and I had started playing, they all began to send me messages about how I was bald and naked from the waist up. the only part of the body it showed. Even though the system didn't allow video or voice communication the way future systems will, the ability to send text messages to each other while we were playing made it a real blast. Yeah, very true. Just look at online gaming today and how far that's come. You can basically choose the eye colour of your character you want to be. You can choose tattoos, scars, whatever else. You don't have to type messages to people anymore. You can get your headset and just abuse them from a different country. It's great. So in this chapter, critical issues, he's obviously discussing critical issues that can come about through technology. This is an exciting time in the information age. It is the very beginning. Almost everywhere I go, whether to speak to a group or to have dinner with friends, questions come up about how information technology will change our lives. People want to understand how it will make the future different. Will it make our lives better or worse? I've already said I'm an optimist, and I'm optimistic about the impact of the new technology. It will enhance leisure time and enrich culture by expanding the distribution of information. It will help relieve pressures on urban areas by enabling individuals to work from home or remote site offices. It will relieve pressure on natural resources because increasing numbers of products will be able to take the form of bits rather than of manufactured goods. It will give us more control over our lives and allow experiences and products to be custom tailored to our interests. Citizens of the information society will enjoy new opportunities for productivity, learning and entertainment. Countries that move boldly and in concert with each other will enjoy economic rewards. Whole new markets will emerge and a myriad of opportunities for employment will be created. When measured by decades, the economy is always in upheaval. For the past few hundred years, every generation has found more efficient ways of getting work done, and the cumulative benefits have been enormous. The average person today enjoys a much better life than the nobility did a few centuries ago. It would be great to have a king's land, but what about his lice? Medical advances alone have greatly increased lifespans and improved standards of living. Henry Ford in the first part of the 20th century was the automotive industry, but your car is superior to anything he ever drove. It's safer, more reliable, and surely has a better sound system. This pattern of improvement isn't going to change. Advancing productivity propels society forward. It is only a matter of time before the average person in a developed country will be richer in many more ways than anyone is today. Just because I'm optimistic doesn't mean I don't have concerns about what is going to happen to all of us. As with all major changes, the benefits of information society will carry costs. There will be dislocations in some business sectors that will create a need for worker retraining. The availability of virtually free communications and computing will alter the relationship of nations and the socio-economic groups within nations. The power and versatility of digital technology will raise new concerns about individual privacy, commercial confidentiality, and national security. There are, moreover, equity issues that will have to be addressed. The information society should serve all of its citizens, not only the technologically sophisticated and economically privileged. In short, a range of important issues confronts us. I don't necessarily have the solutions, but as I started off the book saying, now is a good time for a broad discussion. Technological progresses will force all of society to confront tough new problems, only some of which we can foresee. The pace of technological change is so fast that sometimes it seems the world will be completely different from one day to the next. It won't. But we should be prepared for change. Societies are going to be asked to make hard choices in such areas as universal availability, investment in education, regulation, and the balance between individual privacy and community security. While it is important that we think about the future, we should guard against the impulse to take hasty action. We can ask only the most general kinds of questions today, so it doesn't make sense to come up with a detailed specific regulations. We've got a good number of years to observe the course of the coming revolution, and we should use that time to make intelligent rather than reflexive decisions. Perhaps the most widespread and personal anxiety is, how will I fit into the evolving economy? Men and women are worried that their own jobs will become obsolete. that they won't be able to adapt to new ways of working, that their children will get into industries that will cease to exist, or that economic upheaval will create wholesale unemployment, especially among older workers. These are legitimate concerns. Entire professions and industries will fade, but new ones will flourish. This will be happening over the next 2 or 3 decades, which is fast by historical standards, but may turn out to be no more disruptive than the pace at which the microprocessor revolution brought about its changes in the workplace, or the upheavals in the airline, trucking, and banking industries over the last decade. Although the microprocessor and the personal computer that enabled have altered and even eliminated some jobs and companies, it is hard to find any large sector of the economy that has been negatively affected. Mainframe, mini computer, and typewriter companies have downsized, but the computer industry as a whole has grown, with a substantial net increase in employment as big computer companies such as IBM, DEC have laid people off. Many of those workers have found employment within the industry, usually at companies doing something related to PCs. Outside the computer industry, it is also hard to find a complete business sector hurt by the PC. There are some typesetters who were displaced by desktop publishing programs, but for every worker in that situation, there are several whose jobs desktop publishing created. All the change hasn't been good for all the people, but as the revolution goes, the one set in motion by the personal computer has been remarkably benign. Some people worry that there are only a finite number of jobs in the world, and that each time a job goes away, someone is left stranded with no further purpose. Fortunately, this is not how the economy works. The economy is a vast, interconnected system in which any resource that is freed up becomes available to another area of the economy that finds it most valuable. Each time a job is made unnecessary, the person who was filling that job is free to do something else. The net result is that more gets done, raising the overall standard of living in the long run. If there is a general downturn across the economy, a recession or a depression, there is a cynical loss of jobs. But the shift that came about as a result of technology have tended, if anything, to create jobs. Job categories change consistently in the evolving economy. Once all telephone calls were made through an operator. When I was a child, long-distance calls from our home were made by dialing 0 and giving an operator a number. And when I was a teenager, many companies still employed in-house telephone operators who routed calls by plugging cables into receptacles. Today there are many competitively few telephone companies, even though the volume of calls is greater than ever. Automation has taken over. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived and worked on farms. Growing food was mankind's main preoccupation. If someone had predicted back then that within a couple of centuries only a tiny percentage of the population would be needed to produce food, all those farmers would have worried about what everyone would do for a living. The great majority of the 501 job categories recognized in 1990 by the US Census Bureau didn't even exist 50 years earlier. Although we can predict new job categories, most will relate to unmet needs and education, social services and leisure opportunities. We know that when the highway connects buyers and sellers directly, it will put pressure on people who are currently acting as middlemen. This is the same sort of pressure that mass merchants such as Walmart, Price, Costco, and other companies with particularly efficient consumer merchandising approaches have already put on more traditional stores. When Walmart moves into a rural area, the merchants in the local towns fear the pinch. Some survive, some do not. But the net economic effect on the region is modest. We may regret the cultural ramifications, but warehouse stores and fast food chains are thriving because consumers who vote with their dollars tend to support outlets that pass the productive savings along in the form of lower prices. Reducing the number of middlemen is another way of lowering costs. It will also cause economic shifts, but no faster than the changes happened in retailing in the last decade. It will take many years for the highway to be utilized so widely for shoppers that there will be significantly fewer middlemen. There is plenty of time to prepare. The jobs those displaced middlemen change to might not have even been thought of yet. We'll have to wait and see what kinds of creative work the new economy devises. But as long as society needs help, there will definitely be plenty for everyone to do. And that's all I will read from The Road Ahead by Bill Gates. So how right he is, whether you like the guy or not, he has definitely got a point. He is very in touch with what's going on. And as he was saying about the future of work and jobs, yeah, middlemen are getting cut out all over the world. Middlemen are getting cut out of industries, especially like the banking industry. A lot of branches have closed here in Australia, and it's probably the same in the US and around the world. There's been a lot of branches that have closed. A lot of people have lost their jobs. COVID-19 has really exploited how underprepared society is to deal with a pandemic of this size. It has also exposed just how reliant these middleman jobs are. A lot of the industries that got closed down were obviously not essential services. So all those people giving the workers at McDonald's shit, or you work in a warehouse, you work in a factory, or you work for fast food, or you work for a supermarket. These were the essential services that stayed open. These people didn't lose their jobs or hours, they had them increased. It was all those people who were wearing suits and ties to work, who work in offices, in accounting firms, banks, Wall Street, all these middle managers, executives, and department heads who, think they're all high and mighty, who think they're fucking smart, who look down on these quote-unquote essential workers, were the ones that got laid off. These are the same people heading to unemployment, trying to collect checks because they were scared shitless that their jobs and livelihoods were on the line, and rightfully so. These are a lot of the same people who got told to work at home. It sucks if you're in that position. I'm not saying everyone in that position is bad. It's just I haven't had very many good dealings with bank managers or middle management types. They all seem to be the same type of personality from the same factory, much the same way politicians are. So he is right on that front. I was made redundant a couple of years ago because the greedy CEO thought it was easier to close a company rather than try to improve it or get it back on track. Hundreds of people lost their jobs, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today if that hadn't happened. It gave me the opportunity to do something else, to refocus from the physical retail world to go online, and I haven't looked back since. I probably wouldn't have started a podcast if that hadn't happened. It's also around the same time that I started listening to podcasts. It was a very stressful time. My brother said, "You like podcasts? You like all that weird shit. There's probably hundreds of podcasts out there that you'd love. There's podcasts about Bigfoot, conspiracies, UFOs. You'd love it." So I started listening to a couple. I wasn't as focused on the worrying about, am I going to get another job? I started to think differently. I started to think, if these guys can start a podcast, I can too. And presto, a couple of years later, here I am talking to you. Okay, that is the end of the show. On the next episode, we'll be looking at Bill Gates' TED Talks, the conspiracy theories surrounding Gates and COVID-19, some eugenics, population control, microchips, and everything else that the great Bill Gates conspiracy includes. Thank you very much to everyone listening. If you would like to support the show, there's a few things you can do to help the show grow. One is subscribe to the Truth Tank on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. If you have friends or family you think that might like the show, tell them about it, spread the word, tell people on the bus, random people on the street, just get the word out there. You can also follow and like the Facebook page, share it around to your friends, help it grow. The downloads are going up, and a big thank you to everyone who's downloaded the show. Okay, that's the show. I'll be back in a couple of weeks to a month with part 2 of the great Bill Gates conspiracy. In the meantime, stay smart, stay safe. I am the Tank. This is the truth. May the truth be with you.